Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so pleased to be back with you. This panel is called Training Future Mindful and Ethical Lawyers. And it invites us to think about how legal education can shape not just competent attorneys, but human beings who have health, as I said this morning, who are healthy and are able to act in their practice and in their lives with awareness, compassion, and integrity. For those of you who maybe didn't meet me this morning or hear from me this morning, I'm Johanna Kolb. I'm the Dean of the Law School here. Once again, extend a special welcome to my colleagues who are here, my predecessor, Dean Susan Freewald, as well as to all of our guests here. It's great to have you at our law school. So my co-panelists today are Professors Ron Tyler and screw it up, even though we practice. Philippa?
That's mine.
No, again. Philippa Marullo Anzalone. And each of us is sort of differently situated in the academy, and we share commitment to educating ethical and mindful lawyers for the practice of law. And so today we're going to talk about, some of the challenges and opportunities that we are all facing in our respective places. And so I want to start by asking each of you to correctly introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit more about where you are, where you're situated in the academy, and a little bit about, how you bring mindfulness into your work as teachers of the next generation of lawyers.
Sure. So I'll start with gratitude. Really appreciate the opportunity to be with all of you. I'll try to make sure I speak up because I know that you can hear me here, but I want to make sure you hear me back there. So I'm Ron Tyler. My journey to the academy has been an interesting one. Certainly, I'm 66 years old now. Being born and raised in this country, it was actually, if you had told me when I was 6 that I would be a Stanford law professor, first of all, I wouldn't know what Stanford was. But the notion that I would be a law professor at an esteemed institution would have seemed like a cruel fairy tale. So I'm very grateful for where I have arrived, but I'm also very much aware of the gap between the dream of what America might someday become and what America has always been and continues to be, and is especially clear right now. And I'm grateful to have the chance to be in a place where I think there are some commonly held values, and especially commonly held values around mindfulness. My own mindfulness journey began through integral yoga when I was a federal public defender, job I loved, that I held for 22 years before moving over to Stanford. I could talk some more about, I don't know if we're answering question number 1.
We're not at question 1.
So
okay.
We'll get to that later. So I think I'll just leave it.
We did do a little bit of preparation.
Thank you. I'm Philippa Marullo Anzalone, and I'm at another Jesuit school at Boston College Law School, and I'm very grateful to be here as well. And I see a theme here of public defenders. I never was a public defender, but in law school I did the defense clinic and went into my 3rd round of interviews before I decided to stay in the profession that I'm in. I'm a professor, a tenured professor at BC. I was at Northeastern Law School before that. My tenure mentor was Wendy Parmet, who was just wonderful. And I have what they call a double degree. I have a library degree and a law degree. I started off as an art major. I never thought I'd go into law. And it was like one of these things that just sort of happened. And I came into mindfulness. I was in a lot of physical pain. About 1996, I was hit by a car that came up on the sidewalk. And I had always meditated off and on, but never a consistent practice. And I was talking to someone about MBSR, so I went and went to an MBSR class and thought, I really love this so much. I would love to do more with it and would love to teach it. Then a few years later, the National Task Force report came out. And prior to that, I had started doing meditations in the law school, both at, I had started at Northeastern, but predominantly at BC. And my dean at the time, after I was doing sort of like just calling sits once a week or once every couple of weeks, I designed a class called Mindfulness and Contemplative Practices for Lawyers, and I've been teaching it for about 8 or 9 years now. And it's a very, very popular class, and I think it brings a lot of, to the law school because it's something very, very different. So that's I've been a daily meditator for about a dozen years, a little bit more maybe now. And I'm a practicing Catholic, and as I say to the Jesuits, I'm a Catholic/Buddhist, and that's just fine.
And so some of you heard a little bit about me this morning. So prior to starting my deanship here at the University of San Francisco last July, I was the dean of the University of Idaho, and I went at the end of my second year of deaning. I was so overwhelmed and so burned out, and really feeling just kind of at the end of my rope, and I had no skills for that. Like I was in the kind of, I'm sure some people in here can relate in the you just power through, and then when you hit your limit, you power through some more. And I happened to go, Idaho Women Lawyers organized this retreat in a beautiful place. And one of the speakers was Judy, who's somewhere in here. And so it was like the right messenger in the right moment. And she talked about the MLTT. And I said, I don't really meditate or anything. But I really, the way that I learn is through teaching. That's kind of so how about you teach me how to teach other people? And thankfully, we did that, and it was amazing. I mean, that 8 months course, got me through my last year, through deciding that it needed to be my last year, and through moving here, and has really instilled in me a commitment to thinking about what does it mean to build a law school where people are exposed to this is part of the way that we train lawyers. And I was really lucky to find staff and the community of faculty who see the world the same way. And I would say last week I was at the ABA ALS Dean's meeting, and there was a friend that said, "Oh, will you moderate a small group for the wellness session?" And I was like, God, this is like leaving from behind. I am not good at this at all. And then it turned out to be a presentation about mindfulness. And so it was actually something that and a good reminder. And so just so you all know, that's where the deans are now, is that I think we're all in a place of either quiet or increasingly loud desperation. So all of us are thinking about how to build this in ourselves in a way that, and how to share these practices with our community. So with that, I will ask, Philippa, what does it mean to you to be a mindful and ethical lawyer in today's legal?
I had all these notes, and I'm just not going to even look at them because I've had so many wonderful presentations, and I just feel so enriched by everything that has been shared today. But I think, I had John Kabat-Zinn's definition. You've seen it a couple of times. But I think it's just to be present and to get out from living from here up, because that's what so many of us do. And we're not living in our bodies, we're living in our head. And is what is happening in the head even what's going on? Because we're creating stories. It's sort of like, you know what, I think it's Mark Twain or said that a lot of terrible you have a lot of troubles in your life and some of them have actually happened. And so I think that is one of the things that is most important to impart to nascent lawyers is get with what's happening, be present, be aware of what is happening now, not what's going on in your head, either ruminating about the past or galloping ahead and having a frolicking detour into the future of what could happen. And yet that runs so counter to what so much of the training is in law school. So I hope that answers the question.
So I was thinking about this last night, and I was also thinking about the importance of both this interesting tension between preparation and being authentically present.
Yes.
So I do want to sort of refer a little bit to my notes, but I also want to actually really be present right now, you know, for what comes up for me. So this question about what does it mean to me to be a mindful and ethical lawyer, really what I wrote and what I fully believe is that it involves, first of all, for me personally, a commitment to daily practice. Secondly, it involves a commitment to use the space that practice creates. And finally, it involves a merger of the personal and the professional. So first of all, in terms of commitment to daily practice, it means just that. The recognition that no matter what is going on, whether I want to or don't want to, whatever I think practice might look like that morning, am I willing to simply sit? And in sitting, am I willing to plant the intention to be available for whatever arises in the moment? One of my teachers would say, "Oh, just this now, just this now, just this now." So am I willing to be available for just this now and the beauty that, or ugliness or whatever it is? Another teacher would say to me, "How interesting if we could take everything that arrives and treat each and everything as that bright and shiny object." So that's the first one for me, is what it means to be a mindful and ethical lawyer for me personally, is that commitment to the practice. And then if I think about it in terms of the portability of this commitment to the practice, that's what I think about when I say a commitment to use the space that practice creates. And to use that space then to be able to engage wisely and ethically in whatever I encounter throughout the day. And so that necessarily embodies compassion and respect for others. And when I think about it from the legal point of view, I didn't say it, but I run a public defender clinic. And so that means that my students are in state and federal court, and they are encountering their adversaries, whether those adversaries are in a suit or in a robe or whatever, right? And so how can I actually bring compassion to those encounters personally, before I even worry about what I'm doing for the students? What am I doing for myself to do that? And then finally, I guess really related to that, the personal and the professional, the merger of personal and professional, the idea that I actually don't want to have separate identities. You know, there's this interesting, in clinical education, there's this interesting idea around aiding students as they form their professional identity. And when I began in clinical education in 2012, you know, I'm consuming all of the material so I can say the right thing to the right person, you know, who's making a decision about whether I get the job, you know. And I actually don't believe it the way that I tried to believe it when I consumed that material, because actually I don't want them to create a professional identity. I want them to understand what it means to come into the profession and to bring themselves into the profession and not lose sight of their core values. their core pro-social values, let me be clear. And so that's certainly, to me, part of being a mindful and ethical lawyer then, for me personally, is now a much more intentional blending of let the personal be the professional and the professional be the personal. So those are my answers.
Ron, I have to say, it's student formation. This is in my notes, not just a professional identity.
Right.
So that's very interesting.
Yeah.
You picked up on that. I agree 100%.
Yeah, and I would, the only addition I would add to that is that I think for me, it's the figuring out that you actually can't pull apart the professional and the personal. That's that if, like, I can keep trying to show up, this is the gritting the teeth and bearing it, right? I can keep trying to show up, but ultimately if the personal isn't healthy, isn't isn't, then I'm not showing up and I won't be able to show up. There isn't some way I can kind of hermetically seal the damage, right, to just my own life. And I don't do it well all the time. But that was one of the reasons, another reason that it was so important to me to start this practice is I felt like I was telling everybody else, I'm still guilty of this. It's really important to take care of yourself. I'm telling students, but then I wasn't, if you watched how I was living, it bore no relationship to what I was telling everyone to do. And so I think, part of this for me has been trying to live more authentically what I think and model more authentically what I think are my students and also my colleagues and all the people who work around me do. I am not great at it yet. So we've already sort of started this, but how are law schools or legal workplaces succeeding or falling short in preparing students to be both mindful and ethical attorneys? This relates particularly here as we sit in this place in California, California Rules of Professional Conduct. I'm sure you've all heard about Rule 1.1 a couple of times already today, but lawyer competence is a duty to apply the necessary learning skill, mental, emotional, and physical ability to perform legal services, which is different than some of the other iterations of that rule. So again, what are we doing well and how are we failing in those? Ron, you want to start this time?
Well, sure. I would say when I think about this rule of professional responsibility 1.1, and the way that when I encountered all of those rules, it was easy to think about some lawyers and academics getting together in some room and sort of writing these rules, and then who are they for? What's the perspective from which they were written, and how do they actually really land for the people who are responsible for abiding by them? And this rule 1.1, when I think about ability, applying the necessary learning and the skill, the mental, emotional, and physical ability to perform the services, the necessary learning and skill. Well, that's law school, right? The necessary learning, the doctrinal classes, skill. That sounds like also things that are some of the practical skills that come through trial advocacy, legal research and writing. Not when I was in law school, but now for all law students, the experiential learning that clinical professors like myself, that we're responsible for. But, what I don't think is necessarily happening is that when we look at how students are supposed to have the necessary, the last part of that, the necessary mental, emotional, and physical ability, where is that in the law school curriculum? I would say that it seems to be, boy, I really related to what you said about pushing until you drop. It's like, it seems like it's through trial and error, you work yourself to the edge and you drop over the edge and then you realize, oh, okay, so now I have to pull back. That's very different from actually feeling like that we need a curriculum around helping students understand what their how to apply their emotional assets to the work and how to guard their assets at the same time. Certainly, I think, I would say in the best instances, clinical education, that's that's what it's about, is offering students the opportunity to have the raw material of practice in a limited arena, to allow them to now say, all right, now I've got this practice, this is an actual client, now I have all these things that are coming up for me because of that. And so it's not just the things I learned in my doctrinal classes, it's not just that I now know how to cross-examine someone, what do I do with all of this stuff, right? So I do think that clinical education, to answer your question directly about where our law schools are succeeding, in the best instances, that's what experiential learning and teaching is all about. So I love that. I think that in the best instances, that means that we're helping our students understand social emotional learning. We're helping them understand resiliency. We're helping them understand how to normalize caring for themselves. I think I would give us a passing grade, but not, the academy writ large, a passing grade, but certainly not a grade where there's excellence, because I still think that those aspects are considered, right, we're back to soft skills, and things that are sort of, they're over in the little corner here, and yeah, I hope you get them, which is very different from actually integrating it into the overall culture of the law school. I was on sabbatical. I had the opportunity to sort of check out a few different schools and how they were doing things. I love the fact that Columbia, they have these mindfulness Wednesdays for faculty, staff, students. They give you free lunch, I like that. I'm taking notes. I convinced Stanford to do that. I've run, as Felipa was mentioning, I think I also run weekly meditation sessions at Stanford for faculty, students, and staff. Not this kind of turnout, I'll tell you that, So I think somehow, if we could integrate that more into the culture of the institution, that would make a big difference.
Yeah, I could go and tell you, but already, if you're in a law school, some of the dysfunction of law schools or in practice, because we say with our mouths that we want students to, have this balanced life, but yet there's law review competitions, there are moot court competitions. We're not teaching students to collaborate, we're teaching them to be competitive. When I was in law school, and I've got you by 6 years older than you, but it was look to your left and your right, and one of you won't be here. I mean, opening up the conversation or the journey through 3 years of law school like that is not a very comforting, collaborative, sort of like safety, predictable, whatever. So I think that there are, some of it is just the business, it's the business. But I think what we can do is instead we can help students form and look to their values. And other speakers here have said this today. One of my first things that I have the students do is make a box of all the things that are symbolic of why they came to law school. And I don't put limits on. I don't say it can't be about money. They could include, if some of them, very many of them, throw a dollar bill or a $10 bill into the box. But there are lots of other things. And I think this class is for upperclassmen. It's mostly third years, and there are some second years. So I think it's really important for them to reflect and to be reflective about what brought them to law school, because they're at least 2.5 years in. Mm-hmm. The other thing I have them do is go interview attorneys to find out in firms. It doesn't have to be a firm. It could be somebody working in a public interest. And if they cannot find an attorney, because I don't want a student to be embarrassed to say, I don't know an attorney. So if not, then I say it can be another professional, just come and speak to me about that. But what I've had students go and talk to people in big law, middle-sized firms, small firms, about what kinds of wellness programs are being run. Are they well attended? Who are they planned by? Are they planned by, I give them questions and I say, look, this is a good way for you to meet attorneys where you're not looking for a job too. and you're just like talking about these things. All kinds of answers come back and it makes them think really differently. You heard Laurie Capello, talking about Mints and how well they've done, and they always come through with this. If students interview someone from Mints, it always comes through as authentic. I have other students come through from some firms where two different departments of a particular firm have very, very different views of what's happening. So, I mean, this is the world. Everything is not perfect. All companies or all businesses are not authentic about what they're doing. Another thing I do, and I'll just tell you a short vignette. I hope I'm not talking too much. But anyway, there was one time, every year I have them write a gratitude letter to somebody, but it's not just a gratitude letter. They have to read it to the person. And if the person is not around now because of Zoom, they can, send the letter by email or US mail and then find a time to read that letter. I had one young woman, South Asia. She was so cute, and she came and she told the class, my mother was concerned that I was reading this letter of gratitude to her and thought, are you ill? She said, no, this was an example of this was an assignment. She said that was an assignment in a law school course. And then, we talk about that this may be sort of unnerving for either partners, parents, even children in some cases, that this is an assignment. But why is that unnerving? If you look at why attorneys get censured, they're not usually censured. Now with AI, it could be a little different, but they're usually not censured for not knowing a fact or getting something right. It's because of something that involves a dysfunction of the soft skills or something that they've done because they were trying to distract themselves from their overwhelm, either drinking too much, taking drugs, or whatever that made them, that's why they're censured, taking money, whatever. So we talk about that, and it's this sort of blending of the personal and the professional together in a way that's, I build it, the course is built on MBSR, but with all this extra lawyer stuff, so that it builds very logically. And some students who are and I encourage the skeptics, they say, by the end of the class, they're saying, every student should take this class. And I'll say more for later.
No, I feel like I was really lucky to join the USF community because it's a place that has been thinking about how to address some of the things that cause students to cause students' mental health to suffer. And so I think, well, we don't have it sort of mindfulness, through the curriculum in the way that I would love to see. We have it in lots of different pockets, including we have a Skills for Future Lawyers class, which Katie Moran designed and teaches, that is about, every student takes it in their first semester, and it's about demystifying what law school is to sort of level the playing field. And it includes things like mindfulness. So it's about not just, there is a lot of how you do law school, but some of the how you do law school is, how do you live through law school? How do you survive through law school? How do you thrive while you're in this space? And it's so interesting. There's a message that our students get really consistently that is the sort of the opposite. It's funny, so I'm new. So I stood up to speak to the incoming class first, and I talked about look to the left, look to the right, and said, looked at the people. What are you going to do to lift those two people up?
Right.
And what was funny is that the two people speaking after me said we should have coordinated, because both of us had something like literally the same thing in what they were going to say, and both of them had been. And I just, because I was the dean, I got to preempt that. That's right. Everybody else has to figure it out. But it's really interesting to see how that culture, how that culture can pervade through the law school experience. And so our students all study together for the bar. They come to the library the 2 days after graduation, Monday after graduation, and 8 o'clock, we open the doors and you can claim your spot to study in for the rest of the. This was an innovation of these two sitting here. And it creates this community around this experience that is awful and isolating. So I showed up at 7:30 thinking, oh, I'll get there and I'll be there to welcome all the students, look at me. And there were probably 70 of them there already. The faculty were there for coffee. And so I went to there's a line of backpacks, there's spots and lines. I went to the front of the line and I said, how long can I in here? And they said some crazy thing like 5:30 because there's a specific room that's pretty nice that they wanted to be in. And I said, well, that's awesome. You're going to pass the bar. And the student looked so uncomfortable. And she said, we're all going to pass the bar. And I said, you are 100% right. You got your spot. But it's that, it starts at the beginning to the point where it makes the students feel uncomfortable if it seems like it's not, we're all doing it together. And so it's just, I get chills like thinking about it because it's so different than my own law school experience. But I do also think that it is something that as we model it, as we say it, as we talk about it, our students are hungry for that message. They really, it is a much safer, more secure way to go through law school. And so it gives me a lot of hope that great, we can do these dramatic changes to our curriculum. We need to do them. I think that they're really important, but even just changing how we message and,
Right.
consistently throughout, they're listening, they really are listening and they do pick up on that.
Wait, and Joanne, just now you made me think of something because we're always looking in law schools at the outcome. Like, what is the outcome going to be? And that's the opposite of mindfulness, where you do something not so much for the outcome, but to do it and to stay present while you're doing it. And I say things like that all the time, and like I catch myself, and we all catch ourselves, but I think that's the important thing. Not that we're wrong or right about saying it, but that we catch ourselves and are aware that we're not on autopilot or just sort of that tape going. Think about what you're going to say, or if you do say it, realize you say it. And I think that's what's important. So that's so good in a way that a student said that and you modeled. You're right.
Yeah. No, I mean, so I've already given my answer to the next question, which is inviting us to reflect or share some specific event or moment. And I would say, I have so many with students. They just, I'll give another one what actually wasn't with my student, it was with my kid, because it's so much harder for me to do with my kid than it is to do with all my other, like my kid's here and then I come home and I'm like, I lose whatever wisdom. So I was talking to my son about college and, he was talking about his high school and different percentage. And I was like, do you want to change high schools because you wanted to go to this, whatever, some stupid thing. And he said to me, Mom, I think I'm going to be happy wherever I go to college. Wow. And I was like, first of all, are you really mine? Did I birth a child? Because it's the opposite of anything that has ever come out of my mouth in any circumstance before or after becoming somebody who meditates regularly. So it is, this is for me the presence piece.
Yeah.
Because, sometimes I'm so far ahead that I'm not hearing what anybody is saying to me because I'm into the next meeting, I'm into the next problem, well, they're going to say this and I'm going to say that. And so I think what my nascent mindfulness practice has given me the most so far is this ability to hear when somebody says something like that and not, and sit with it, sit with it, respond to it and say, yes, of course you're right. We're all going to pass the bar. You know what? Of course you're going to be happy when you go to college. You are happy now and you are going to bring that with you. And wherever you go to college is not going to be the determination. It's not going to determine that. That I think is something that I didn't have before, that you were saying that it's you having your practice and then what do you do with that space? It's been the space. So are there particular moments that either of you want to reflect on, students or colleagues in law school?
I do. I decided, I was thinking there's so many different possibilities in the, so I'll sort of touch on, but then I'll dive into one of them. I thought, well, I could talk about last year in clinic and the opportunities that arose for students to one core value is recognizing that there's no one outside the circle of human kindness, right? No one. And how one team had the opportunity to truly get to know this Black transgender woman who had been unfairly stopped by the police. And then based on that unfair stop, there was a series of unconstitutional events that unfolded. And to lift her up, and also to notice the way that the things they needed to do in order to push against it, throughout every encounter, the way that the judge is misgendering her, the prosecutors, and to gently and compassionately make that stop was just so beautiful to see. And a young woman, a lesbian who'd been a survivor of violence, who also had to grapple with the fact that her family and her community was full of gun advocates in spite of that. And the person that she was primarily responsible in her team for representing was someone who was charged with a gun offense, with possession of it, with transporting the gun in a way that they're not supposed to. But he was actually not a violent person at all. And she came in her final reflections to understand to really grapple with the differences between her deeply held beliefs as opposed to values, grappling with the idea of keeping us safe from whom, keeping who safe from whom. It was just beautiful to watch her do that. And then finally, thinking about colleagues, I guess that's the one I really wanted to go more deeply into, which is that as I've had the privilege of going around the country teaching mindfulness and resiliency workshops, finding ways to offer messages that people could receive. One thing that I've landed on is something that I call the embodied no, but the way I introduce it to people is I say, think about that thing that you said yes to recently that you sure as hell wish you had. And how does it feel right now? Exactly. There's so many things. And as you think about that, how does it feel in the body right now? Right? I mean, there's a clench to the jaw, maybe there's some tightness in the stomach, and I said, what if we could just roll it back a little bit to the time that you were asked? And what if you switched and it said no, then what would that feel like in the body? Right? And can you really just check in with your body, because our bodies give us so much information. Instead of just let me think about it, let me feel about it. Right? And I said, is it possible to have compassion for yourself right now about that thing? Because we can't go back, but actually it may very well be that one of those things that you've said yes to, you can still say, you know what, on second thought, hell no. And of course, this is part of the practice, the compassion, the being present in your body. And so I don't have to say to them, and I just gave you a little morsel for mindfulness, right? That's okay. But it is a great example of how the practice has been beneficial as a way of nurturing mindfulness for my colleagues. So.
Like Ron, I could go through a whole bunch of stories, but I'll take the most recent one. Just maybe 2 weeks ago, I was coming out of a meeting, and one of my students was coming up the stairs of the building I was in. And I said, oh, Laura, you're studying for the, how's the bar study going? And we started talking. And she was just saying how she had been using the meditation practices. She said, Felipa, and if I don't have time for the meditation, I'm doing the breath work, because it doesn't take as much time and it just comes more easily. And we talked, and then she said, we were about to leave each other. And she said, I just want to tell you something else. She had missed a class or two because of some pain that she had in her back going into her hip joint or something. And she said to me that the pain was overwhelming, but that she really, when we would do body scans in class, she started really getting into the body scan. At first, she hadn't liked it, but got so into the body scan that she realized that if she focused on the pain instead of like clutching, because I guess, she was like holding herself in a particular way when she would feel this like excruciating pain, that if she just paid attention to it and sort of faced it, that she would see the pain arise, she would see it endure for a while, and then it would go away. And she said, I know this sounds like a miracle, but she said, I honestly experienced days now without the pain, whereas before she was feeling this pain every day. And I said, Laura, I totally believe you. I understand. And I told her the story, how I had come into MBSR or sort of re-entered that meditation space because, and I told her about my accident when my kids were young and all of that. And I had back surgeries, both knees are replaced. I'm like bionic woman. But anyway, I just told her these stories. And I just think that that's so meaningful that, we were mainly talking about her bar prep and that the bar was coming up and all of this. But it's like she started to walk away and she said, I want to tell you about, that thing I had to ask for, to let you know why I wouldn't be in class. And I was it really was so impactful to listen to her, that it goes beyond, the mental stress and the overwhelm, that sometimes just the way we deal with everyday life can be so like sent on another circuit that is so much healthier.
Amazing. All right, we're running a little short on time, although I think we get a few minutes. No, I think we get a little time back because we started late. So I'm going to ask one more question and then we'll open it up. And so I'll ask, how, and some of your answers are already getting to this, but how do we best help students navigate the tension between legal culture, speeds, demand for productivity, adversarial nature, competition, financial pressures, reputational pressures, and mindful ethical practice?
Well, I think it's important to start with an examination of values and to go into values, because I think that that's one of the most important things. And maybe it's because I'm at the Jesuit school and we spend a lot on time, not necessarily in the law school, but I'm totally into nation discernment. So I really am very, very much into that. I also think that modeling vulnerability, and that I tell them stories about, and some of you in this group may have heard this. My daughters went to a Catholic school where the principal was Sister Maureen Joseph. It's the Congregation of the Sisters of St. Joseph. And one of the principal was saying, oh, Felipe, you've done so well. And I went to this all-girls Catholic school and you're our pride and joy. And I said, Sister Mojo, you don't know. That's what used to call her. I said, you don't know. I sometimes, because this is before the mindfulness thing, I said, I give people the finger in the car. I give them the birds sometimes because, if they like cut me off or something. And she goes, Felipe, just do what I do. Give the whole hand. And so I just thought that was like such a wonderful thing, because I just didn't want her to think I was better than I am. And so that was like such a wonderful thing. So I tell sometimes the students that story, or I'll tell them that, I'm telling you this, but sometimes like you just said, Joanna, and some of your examples, I don't, pay enough attention. I don't say no enough sometimes, or just little things. But then I say, and even I can be saved. And I really think that students love that. And I think it opens up, something that this person is human too. And, she's not going to bite our heads off. And it's like showing a little bit of self-kindness and self-compassion helps them do the same thing. So I think that's the most important thing, is just even when you're wrong. Another time in class, I said something about we were cleaning up after an art project. Maybe it was when we were doing those the fajitas. And I was just cleaning up and I said to the law students, I said, you don't have to be OCD about, cleaning up. And this is like way back, this maybe 8 years ago. And one student came to me later and she said, Professor Anzalone, I just want to tell you, I have OCD. And I said, I'm really sorry. That's just like shorthand. I said, I think I have it too. I said, but I shouldn't have said it that way. And I've never said that again because I didn't want to, harm her or make her think that. And I didn't react and say, I don't, get defensive. I said, you're absolutely right. I shouldn't have said it that way. And she became one of my biggest cheerleaders and everything else. And I just think admitting when you make a mistake or you say something that you shouldn't say. I just think it's important.
Yeah, we actually did not compare notes and make it, we were, it really, the things that I have to share are really identical, although not the flipping people off. But I used to yell at them and flip them off. And my wife would go, you are always talking to the drivers. It's like, they can't hear you. They can't hear you. And my sister talks about the difference now in driving with me these years since I'm such a deep mindfulness practice. And so anyway, I thought about that. So I would say that fundamentally what I can be proudest of are those classrooms where we center, for our students, we center mindfulness and ethical behavior as classroom values.
Yes.
From the beginning, from day one. And I think in order to center them from day one, we actually have to go back before day one and design courses and design evaluations that will actually be based on those same mindful and ethical values. So I say to my students and to my colleague who I co-teach with, that a core value for me is design out stress, design in peace. Because there's all these things that if we just do them automatically, they actually create stress. And it's like, why? Why is that necessary? So I will, for example, talk with students and I'll say, the reason that this is the deadline is not because they're so used to artificial deadlines. I'll say, it's not an artificial deadline. I want you to understand the reason this deadline is here is because once you provide it to me or to Carly Warehorn, who teaches with me, we then need to edit your work, and you deserve actually intentional edits. It takes a great deal of time. And so that's why this is the deadline. And then actually to include compassion and an opportunity to recover. So that's another value. And it's a value that really came home to me even more during my sabbatical, watching as part of my mindfulness teacher training, watching the teacher who was running the MBSR course and the way she would respond to participants who they clearly hadn't prepared, where they'd missed the last session, whatever. And rather than it being a tisk sort of thing, it was so compassionate. And she would start the class by saying, I noticed that so-and-so is not here. I hope that they're okay. Or when I heard from so-and-so, you'll notice they're not here and it's because of the following reason. It just so deeply seated in compassion that it made such a deep impression on me. I thought, I need to, even though I'm proud of certain things I've got that I'm doing in my clinic, I would like to center compassion even more so, and center more this idea that there's always the chance to begin again, right? That's a fundamental notion of mindfulness, right? I mean, what we with Vipassana, insight meditation, we focus on the breath and then we're not focusing on the breath anymore, and then we begin again, right? Well, the same is true for all of life. There's always chance to begin again. So to make sure that's there. And so this overall idea of practicing and modeling these values, to me, then with the criminal defense clinic, how do we talk about our adversaries as we're preparing our students to go into the courtrooms, as if we're engaged in a moot and I'm being the judge in the moot, or another student is being a prosecutor? How do we talk about the people who are in those roles in a way that actually does not other them, because they are still deserving of compassion and frankly will be better advocates if we can be fully situated in their perspective. So these are things that I think about as ways that we can really help our students so clearly.
all of that really resonates with me. I mean, I think, so I was saying I moderated this breakout session with the other deans, and afterwards I had multiple people come and say, thank you so much for your vulnerability. And I was like, I didn't feel vulnerable. But I think it's in the sense that like I didn't, I've gotten through this and through MLTT so much more used to kind of being authentically myself in whatever the moment is, and sort of being able to talk about that it doesn't feel like something that is like raw, so that sharing it in somebody's response to it is going to hurt. But it was so interesting to have people to have that sort of moment of reflecting and in terms of how they felt I was reacting versus how I felt. The other thing that I think I learned, it's funny for me, I don't know if this happens for other people. So there's like, I focus on the breath and then I lose it and I'm off on something else, which is like my day to day. And then I focus on the breath again or whatever. And then I'm lost and I come back and forth. And then something really deep will hit me. And I remember saying to Judy at some point, I'm like, well, where does that fit? Because it's not it's just something that will happen. And one of the things that sort of came out of MLTT for me was that so much of my life has been driven by a scarcity, right? A fear of like, it isn't, I'm not enough, there isn't enough, I won't, and so much of that is like law school, right? It's law school and the legal profession and the rankings and the ratings and and so what I am trying to cultivate in myself, and then in the way that I talk with students and faculty and others is like to really kind of center abundance, and think about that, because to me that's so much of the stress and fear and anxiety of law school comes from the sense of that there's only so many ways to be a lawyer, or so many ways to be successful, or only so many jobs, or only so many, and my lived experience tells me that is not true. And so the more that I'm able to try to bring that, my lived experience of all the different ways that everyone I know who went through law school with me, ended up finding, and my own life of like, oh, I thought it was this didn't work, and ending up in a job that I love so much where I feel so much myself. And so trying to, with prospective students as they think about their choices, with trying to decenter this idea of like, we're all in a US News ranking, no matter how long, in law school and then in life, we're all trying to be the same as some ideal, and really trying to get students to think harder and to take as many opportunities. You said this bunch about what brought me to law school, what do I care about, what are my core values, and to try to allow them to do that despite everybody is over here trying to do this, so maybe that's the thing I should be doing too. And saying, no, that's actually not what I'm interested in. What I'm interested in is over here, and it's different than what it seems like they're doing. I mean, to me, that is, if I can inculcate that somehow, and my colleagues and I can repeat that message of abundance to our students, and that their job here is to figure out like, how are they going to serve? Like, what's the place where what they love? I always say what you love and what you're good at intersect. Like, and that's different for everybody. That's not the same. That to me is the best way I can think, sort of macro way to think about reducing the cult, changing this culture that I think drives so much of the misery in law schools and then professionally.
You just said it, because comparison is the thief of joy, and that's really what law schools are based on, is this whole comparison thing. Who's the best? Who does the most? Whose students get into the biggest big law firm? And that's the key right there. it's not a comparison. It's, yeah, what brings you joy.
Comments, questions? Oh, back in the corner?
Yeah, this one is for Ron. You mentioned, you know, how compassionate the MBSR teacher was when people weren't prepared. And we've been having discussions at my law school, which is the University of New Mexico, about how you can, you know, not just let it happen, right, when they're not prepared, but how you might be able to say something that would not be hurtful. So do you have any ideas on that?
Yeah.
Well, I think that I do have some ideas on that, and it really is, the two-word answer is office hours.
So not in the class.
Right, because I think that there's a feeling of being, well, speaking for myself, right, called out, oh my God, everybody can see me. Whereas I'm striving to create a culture where coming to office hours is considered a normal thing to do.
Yeah.
So some of the times it means scheduling office hours, like everybody, here's your slot, actually. And you can talk about whatever you want when you're there or whatever. And so for those students to know, that student who felt caught out, to know that there will be this chance of office hours, and then to begin the conversation of office hours with, you know, with something that sounds compassionate. It seemed like you were struggling. I just want to make sure you're okay. I want to see what I can do because I want you to be successful. I think about how I was just in a training program. It's called the National Criminal Defense College, where criminal defense attorneys from all over the country and some outside of the country come together for these 2-week sessions, and I'm part of their faculty. And they were struggling to learn this, what for some is a new means of jury selection called deselection. People usually think of, I'm going to find the jurors I want, and I'm going to teach the other jurors how to do what I want. Deselection is, no, find the jurors who this just isn't the right case for them. They should be somewhere else instead. And so ask those questions, inhabit their reality and ask them questions. And it's really hard to do. And so this one gentleman was just getting so frustrated. And I came over to him and I said, I really just want you to be successful. That's really what I want. So let me give you some suggestions here. And it just brought the temperature down.
So that's such a deep point about the norming the off, you know, about getting ahead of it, right? So when I first started teaching him, that was one of my first or second year, I had a student bombed, failed the platinum, you know, this profile. And when I found out, and I was sort of surprised, and she ended up coming to talk to me, then it turned out that she'd come home like earlier that week and found her stepson had hung himself. She found it. And she didn't tell anybody. She showed up and took this test. And you know, it's pretty hard to unwind a failed test. It's a lot easier to. So that has been very formative for me in terms of trying to make sure that none of my students would ever do that again. You know, I mean, obviously people are people, but to try to norm availability, accessibility, support, office hours. If it's not me, it's somebody else. If it's not, you know, so that we know in advance, you know, so that people are telling us in advance rather than telling us when they didn't turn in the work and therefore the clients,
right.
You know, the client's work has not been done and there's a crisis. And so I think, that I just think is so important because it's once you're in it, if you don't have that relationship, it's so hard to then figure out how do you talk to the student and how do you approach it when it, you know, who knows, maybe they're just not doing the work and maybe something awful has happened and there's not really a way to, it's easier if the relationship is already there, that when the deviation happens, address it.
And unring the bell.
As an adjunct of legal ethics and professional responsibility at preschools, the perpetual dumping ground of anything, you know. So I'm thrilled to see that schools are actually having classes, right? Or discussing it in clinics. Why can't, from an organizational psychology or organizational culture, why can't every professor weave in some aspect of mindfulness? Whether you start the class with a grounding exercise or a breathing exercise, or, you know, during your break, you do something, you know, or I don't know what it is, but some mindful or coping mechanism, right? Recognizing that the profession is going to be stressful, different, making it different every week. And I recognize all professors aren't comfortable with this, but let's get them comfortable. What do they do to help themselves, and how can they help the students? And seeing it from everyone, all the professors, all the classes, and recognizing this is a central tenet of this school. This is what we believe in. This is what we want to give to you. And I think it's possible. We should be doing it.
Tracy, right?
Tracy.
Yes. This is like, you're sitting here in a group of people who are sort of, I don't mean to disparage us, we drunk the Kool-Aid. Do you know what I mean? No. But
San Francisco.
But about 3 years ago, when I was talking to a colleague who's a lovely person, I said, you know, Bex, maybe sometime you'd like to come to one of the sits. And she said to me, I'd rather go for a root canal. And this is, you know, a person who's very, very well regarded. She's an excellent teacher. So there are a lot of people on the different faculties or administrators who think it's like.
Then why can't we say, well, what do you do to cope with you? What is it for you? If this is not it, there's gotta be something.
And I'm not trying to be
like, yeah.
hopeless about this. All I'm saying is we're gonna get a different view in this room or in this classroom
Sure.
than we will in going through the halls. Like if you were to come through the halls of my law school, you'd see some people would say, oh, all my students loved, you know, like, I wish she'd do 2 sections of it, or, you know what I mean, things like this. But then you're gonna see people who think, oh, you know, rolling of eyes.
Well, I just wanted to say one other thing, which is that, you know, we're used to being experts in what we teach.
Right.
And so if it isn't something that we know, if it's not something that we're comfortable with, if we haven't been taught how to do it, it's different, you know, and it requires sort of, you know, in some ways, I mean, my colleague Matthew here starts every class with a mindful practice, you know, but you have to know how to navigate it. You have to know how to talk to the student who comes up afterwards and is like, why are we wasting our time? Like, and if you aren't steeped in it somehow yourself and you're not comfortable, then that's hard, right? So I think, you know, we need to do a better job teaching, and I don't mean you, I mean, we as institutions need to do a better job equipping our faculty to help them both think through this stuff. I mean, which is hard. I mean, Judy will tell you, like, I cried all the way through my final presentation. Like, I didn't let her put it on the internet. I was like, don't put this on. It's raw. Like, this stuff, you pull a little bit and you realize that, like, most of your coping strategies and maybe a lot of what you've told yourself about your life and who you are actually is not true. So, you know, doing this a little bit can be as hard as doing it a lot, I guess, is all I'll say. So I do think I do think that we should get there, but I think we've got a lot of work to do with the people who aren't in this room to make that possible. So,
Not that it's crazy,
No, not crazy.
Great,
It's for it.
Yes.
So my question, so in my office, people get promoted to be supervisors typically because they are considered to be very good trial lawyers or good workers, and they get promoted. And what I noticed, 2 things. One is they're not ever trained how to be supervisors. They're put in supervisor role. And the second part is how they are evaluated as supervisors. Nothing is ever judged on performance of their support staff and their attorneys. That's not a criteria in judging their work, right? It's always trial staff and other staffs. And I have brought it up to them, and it hasn't been receptive, but A, they need to be trained how to be supervisors, because being a good trial lawyer doesn't mean you're a good supervisor. But also make that a component, because they're only gonna do the work that they're asked of, right? So if you're not judged on, you know, sort of happiness of your support staff and your attorneys, they won't make that a priority. In that same vein, how is that in terms of your faculty? when you onboard new teachers, is that something that they're taught? And B, is that one of the measures that you judge them on their performance? Because they're not gonna do something that they're not asked to do.
Sorry, I didn't mean to. I'm just realizing that I failed as the moderator was shutting things down. So, yeah, so there's more, I would say, of a feedback loop for faculty because students, although not necessarily all of the support staff and colleagues, but there is also the review that happens amongst other faculty. So there are more. So the short answer is there are more ways that we get feedback about whether faculty are contributing, taking away from student wellness, but we could certainly be doing more to, as we integrate new faculty, talk to them more explicitly.
I would think institute 360s.
That would be great.
Please join me in thanking my co-parents.